Why does the US Navy wear camouflage, like especially blue camouflage? If you fall overboard into the water, doesn't that make you just harder to find? Why are the uniforms blue if you're going to be harder to find if you're in the water? And why do you have green camouflage if you're a maritime force? Why does the Navy have camouflage at all? Like, what do you think you're going to be blending in with? Well, first of all, there's a few things we need to look at. The first thing is when these uniforms are worn and why they're worn. The first one is the Navy Type 1 uniform, which is nicknamed the Blueberries. It's the blue and silver camouflage. That uniform was designed to have the colors that are the most commonly used paint colors on the ship. We've all walked around the ship before, and you see people with like paint marks on their uniforms, their coveralls, their tupacs, and they don't want the entire uniform to be ruined just because you got a couple of specks of paint on it. So they came up with this design where if you got a little bit of paint on your uniform, it wouldn't be ruined and so obviously worn. The uniform was blue because it was meant to show like naval heritage, but the Navy did hear the complaints about people saying that if they fell overboard, it'd be harder to find them. And the uniforms were also not flame resistant, which is very important on ships. So eventually they got banned from ships altogether. So now the Navy had a problem. They had a uniform that was designed to be used at sea, but it's banned from being used at sea. So you're wearing blue camouflage on land, which doesn't blend in with anything. And so in 2019, they just got rid of the uniform altogether. The Blueberries uniform was also apparently like a thicker material and kept you hotter, which is not a very good thing because on Navy ships it can be pretty hot sometimes, especially in certain places of the ship. And that's a topic we're going to be covering later, the temperature on ships. But it's one of the reasons they got rid of it also. Okay, so but if blue uniforms are dangerous because if you fall overboard it's going to be harder to see you, why are we still issuing like blue coveralls and blue Tupac uniforms? Well, it actually does make sense. First of all, if you fall overboard into the water, you're not going to be standing in the water like waving at rescuers. You're going to be like 90% submerged into the water, and they're going to be lucky if they find you at all, especially at night. So the color of your uniform is not going to make that much of a difference. What is going to make a difference is like how much splashing you can do. If you can come up with any kind of signals like waving and flashlights or a flare gun or something, that's going to make a much bigger difference than just wearing a different color. So Blueberries were the Type 1 uniforms. The Type 2 uniforms are the ones that look like the marine camouflage. It's the desert looking pattern. The Type 2 uniforms were meant to be worn by like MAs and Special Forces and FMF corpsmen that are working with Marines. And it did make sense at the time, but in case you haven't heard, most of like the desert wars are over with, especially compared to their heights, but it was like between 2001 and 2021 with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. The wars are pretty much over. At this point, there's less than, it's public information, there's less than 3,000 troops in Iraq and obviously nobody in Afghanistan. There's still some people, like I was stationed in Bahrain for a while. We didn't use the Type 2 camouflage, we used the N-dubs still. We were like the only country in the base that was using woodland camouflage in a desert environment. But nevertheless, we were not using that camouflage. There's also obviously in publicly available information, troops in Syria and other places, but it's nowhere near as much as it used to be during the heights of the conflict before 2021. So desert camouflage is really not going to be needed as much as it used to be. So you had the Type 1 uniform, the Blueberries, you had the Type 2 uniform, which was the desert camouflage, which is really not needed anymore. Then you have the Type 3 uniform, which is what you see all the time. Now, when it first came out, it was only for Special Forces. Like, this is the camouflage that's the Navy's equivalent of like the woodland patterns and the land-based patterns that other branches were using. And so Special Forces, I think, used it because it was something only they could have. Well, then, of course, they got rid of Type 1 and Type 2, basically. I mean, Type 2 is still around a little bit. But Type 1 was discontinued in 2019. Once it became something that everybody was using, it was no longer special to have it. Every time a special unit or any kind of special organization, special job has something that only they have, they like to show it off. Like, you see the BMs, they wear their whistle as like a ceremonial uniform item. You see, like in World War II, you have like tank crews or pilots, they would show off their uniform and wear it in times when they don't really need it, just to show off their specialty. And even today with pilots, you'll see them walking around in flight suits, even if they're nowhere near any planes, they're not on, on shift for sorties, or they're not even at an air base. They still walk around in the flight suit to show like, hey, I'm a pilot and you're not, something like that, it's fun. By the way, these videos are not monetized and I don't insert ads. I'm just trying to get you the information that I wish I could find before I joined and during my career. So all I ask in return is that you hit the like button and subscribe, and I really appreciate it. And if you want to support the channel, it's in the description. So the Type 1 uniform was dropped. The Type 2 uniform was like restricted in usage. What are we supposed to wear? Well, the answer is the Type 3 uniform mentioned earlier, which is the N-dubs. And it's basically a modern, digital camouflage version of the 1980s woodland pattern that they use. And it makes me think of like the National Guard in GTA Vice City, but it's the modern version of that camouflage. At least that's the way I see it. Again, it doesn't necessarily make that much sense for us to wear like a green camouflage on land, especially at sea. It doesn't make any sense. And people do wear the N-dubs at sea sometimes, especially if you're new. That's one of the ways you tell if somebody's brand new is because they're walking around the ship in N-dubs as opposed to one of the blue uniforms or coveralls. But like, I guess it makes sense to use it on land and then have like the coveralls and tupacs at sea. Green camouflage is probably not the most important thing the Navy needs because, again, it's probably not going to be that useful. If you're in the Navy, you're probably behind a desk or standing at a gate like me. You're walking around the base trying to get a haircut or go to the movie theater. Like, you're on a ship, you don't need to blend in with the forest. You're not poking around the jungles of Vietnam. I guess it makes sense to look military while also not looking ridiculous by being blueberry flavored, but it's really not needed necessarily. But I get the idea, like Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Space Force, Coast Guard, like everybody has their own camouflage or camouflage versions. And if you have a solid blue uniform, you might look like the Coast Guard from a distance. If you have green camouflage, people think you're Army. Like I have friends that go on Facebook, they post family pictures, and their family's like, I'm so proud of my little soldier. It's like, Mom, I'm in the Navy. So with the Type 1 uniform, it's ineffective on land, unsafe at sea, and it doesn't really look that good because you don't want to have your guys looking like they're blueberry flavored. So they got discontinued. Type 3 uniform, we're not really in the jungles. The guys that are supposed to wear it don't. The guys that have to wear it, not all of them like it. So we're kind of stuck with that too. What's the solution? Well, with each branch, it does make sense. They want to have their own identity. They want to have friendly competition and everything. So like Army and the Air Force, they share a camouflage, the OCP. Maybe the Navy can use that same one, but then from a distance, well, with the Type 2, you look like Marines. If we use the OCP, now we look like we might be Army or Air Force. And even right now, it's kind of hard to tell them apart, except for the Army has full color flag patches and the Air Force has subdued ones. The best solution is probably to just have solid blue uniforms for everyone, have tupacs and coveralls at sea, tupacs on shore, and that would be the best solution. A lot of people think the Navy has just like too many uniforms, and I kind of agree with that. And all these branches kind of change uniforms and whole identities like every 5 to 10 years, like with the Army getting rid of their greens and switching over to just blues, and then from there they bring back World War II uniforms, and the Navy changes every couple of years, and they make the female and the male uniform for dress whites and dress blues the same when before they were different, which is actually a positive change. Same thing with the Marine Corps. They changed it to where there's one uniform for just the dress blues for both sexes, and that's actually a good change. But unlike the other branches, the Marine Corps has actually basically had the same uniform since the 1880s, which I really respect. The other branches like change uniforms every couple of years, and sometimes it feels like they change identities every couple of years. And the Marine Corps has shied away from that, and that's actually a really respectable thing.